William takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall. Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to the centre ground.
No one could have predicted this, but King Charles has just announced his abdication from the throne. This was a bombshell, leaving many wondering if it was a royal joke, a mistake, or a rumor, as it was too shocking to be true. For over 7 decades, Charles had waited patiently to take the throne from his mother, but when the moment came, he chose to step down, naming William and Catherine the nation's future. What could have happened behind the scenes that led to this shocking decision? Keep watching as we unveil the true story behind King Charles's abdication. King Charles bows out of the monarchy in his final speech. "I'm abdicating." These were the words that sent shock across the faces of everyone glued to their screens, watching King Charles's most recent address to the nation. Was this King Charles's final statement as monarch? Viewers could hardly believe it, but they had heard it with their own ears. But then the truth behind this decision began to fall into place. King Charles ascended the throne in September 2022, shortly after the death of his beloved mother, Queen Elizabeth II.
Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II,
who had ruled from the age of 25 and passed away at 96. Queen Elizabeth was the longest-serving monarch in British history, holding on to the reins of power until her final breath. She served the British monarchy with compassion, dignity, and unwavering strength. Even when she was frail, she stood tall, attending to her royal duties till her last breath. Queen Elizabeth upheld the monarchy with a standard of grace that was nearly impossible to match. Charles and Camilla waited patiently for the reins of power to pass to them, but it did not happen until Charles was 73 years old, after 71 long years of waiting. It was an extraordinary length of time for anyone to wait to become king. But Charles had no choice but to wait. When he finally wore the crown, he became the oldest monarch ever to ascend the British throne. Although Charles began his reign in old age, this moment felt like a long-awaited dream come true. Yet many believed Charles's time of waiting was more than a coincidence, that it was a form of justice for hurting Princess Diana. Some even said the delay was heaven's way of making him and Camilla face what they once caused another to endure. But what was worse was not the long wait, it was what followed after he finally became king. Barely 2 years after taking the throne, a series of misfortunes began to unfold in the royal family, from health scares, political tensions, and unexpected scandals that almost tore the royal family apart. Many whispered that the late Princess Diana's spirit still lingered, restless and watchful in Buckingham Palace, ready to haunt King Charles's reign. But how true is this? Keep watching as the story is only just beginning. In January 2024, barely 4 months after King Charles III's coronation, Buckingham Palace announced that the king had been diagnosed with a benign condition and was undergoing a procedure said to be common for thousands of men each year. At first, the announcement was vague. It felt as though the palace was trying to keep the public from knowing what was truly going on. Eventually, it became clear that King Charles had sought treatment for an enlarged prostate. Reports later suggested that the public might never have known about his condition if not for the complications that followed, which forced him to leave Buckingham Palace for a while. Since people were going to ask questions about his sudden absence, the palace had no choice but to make the situation public. Following the revelation of the king's health issues, it was also added that King Charles was going to step back from his public duties to focus on his health, as that was the nation's priority. After all, only a healthy king could lead a strong kingdom. Many were shocked by this announcement, especially since his reign had only just begun. The public sent their sympathy, well wishes, and prayers to him as they hoped to see him back on his feet soon. Since King Charles was stepping away for some time, the reins of power naturally shifted to Prince William, the heir to the throne, who was expected to carry on his father's duties and maintain the family's presence in public life. However, something unexpected happened that prevented William from taking on the full role. Prince William couldn't fully step into his father's position because his wife, Princess Catherine, was also battling health challenges. On the very same day the king's diagnosis was made public, Kensington Palace announced that Catherine had undergone abdominal surgery and was recovering.
Today, Britain's Princess Kate is in the hospital where she's recovering from abdominal surgery.
William, known for being a deeply devoted husband and father, chose to remain by her side during that difficult period. His decision meant he couldn't take on all the heavy responsibilities of leadership while his wife was unwell. This left much of the royal workload to fall on Princess Anne and Queen Camilla, who were the two most senior and active members of the royal family at the time. Prince William continued to handle what duties he could while staying close to his family, balancing his royal commitments with his private worries. But while the world prayed for the king's recovery, another shocking news came just weeks later. In February, barely a month after the health scare, Buckingham Palace released another statement that stunned the world. King Charles was diagnosed with cancer.
Breaking news from Buckingham Palace, which has announced that the king has been diagnosed with cancer.
This was a bombshell. The news spread like wildfire with many speculations. Many began to wonder if this was the beginning of the end of King Charles's reign. Wasn't it heartbreaking that Charles, who had waited 70 years for the throne, now faced such a health battle less than 2 years into his rule? Though the palace didn't disclose the exact type of cancer, they revealed that the cancer was discovered during medical checks related to his prostate treatment. The statement also mentioned that the king had already begun his treatment, but would continue to handle state business and official documents as usual. This revealed to the public that King Charles had no intention of surrendering his position. As long as he could still sign his name and lift a pen, he would remain their king. Messages of support poured in from all over the world for King Charles. Even Prince Harry was reported to fly in from California to see his father, worried about whether he might have only limited time left with him. In the meantime, Prince William once again stepped forward to take on more of the monarchy's day-to-day duties. But before long, another blow struck the royal family, one that forced William, the future king, to step back from his growing responsibilities. In March 2024, Prince William's wife, Catherine Middleton, was also diagnosed with cancer. Although the exact type was not disclosed, the news stunned the nation. It came just a few short weeks after King Charles's own diagnosis, leaving the royal household shaken. Two of the most senior members of the royal family were now facing serious health battles at the same time. Catherine's diagnosis affected her and her family both physically and emotionally, especially Prince William. He struggled to focus on royal duties, his thoughts constantly returning to Catherine at home. Catherine withdrew from public life to concentrate on her recovery, and William also took time away to support her and their children. For the Wales family always came first before any royal duties. Unlike Queen Elizabeth and King Charles, who had long prioritized duty above everything else, they placed their family first. This was one of the most difficult times for the royal family, but they stood united, ensuring the monarchy continued its affairs normally while hoping for some good news. 2 months later, the public saw King Charles and Queen Camilla attending service at St. George's Chapel for the Easter Sunday celebration.
We can see the King and Queen now arriving at St. George's Chapel, their vehicle pulling up.
The crowd praised his courage and determination to keep working behind the scenes while battling illness. Though the king was undergoing treatment, he continued to appear at selected events and handled his official duties. Insiders later revealed that Charles was showing up mainly for Camilla's sake. She reportedly didn't want them to lose their grip on power or to have Prince William take over too many royal responsibilities, fearing it might make her husband appear weak before the nation. During Charles's health crisis, Camilla had also advised Charles not to reveal his condition publicly at all, believing that such transparency would invite criticism and damage their reign. Her determination to preserve their standing pushed Charles to keep working, to show strength even when his body was failing him. He did everything he could to keep going, but behind the palace walls, his health continued to decline. Royal watchers also alleged that King Charles's cancer diagnosis had not gone away, but was being carefully managed. This statement turned out to be true, unlike Catherine, who later updated the public that she was cancer-free and had returned to her royal duties there was never any similar declaration from the king, no confirmation, no reassurance. As time passed, questions about King Charles' condition grew louder, yet Buckingham Palace remained silent until King Charles shocked the world with a speech that would change everything. When Charles announced that he was abdicating the throne and named his son and daughter-in-law, Prince William and Princess Catherine, as the nation's future. It was a moment no one had expected. Insiders later revealed that Queen Camilla was far from pleased about the decision, but there was nothing she could do. She had tried to convince Charles not to make the announcement, but he didn't change his mind. While many knew Prince William was one day going to inherit the throne, like his father had inherited the throne from Queen Elizabeth II. No one expected Charles to abdicate. It was unthinkable that he had waited his entire life for the crown only to step down willingly, without giving any explanation. However, King Charles was not the first royal to abdicate the throne. To understand the weight of this decision, we must look back at another king who changed the course of British history with a similar act. The abdicated king. When Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David was born in 1894 to the Duke and Duchess of York, he was destined for the throne as the eldest son of King George V and Queen Mary. But fate took a different turn because of one decision that altered the monarchy forever. At 16, Edward was created Prince of Wales, just 7 weeks after his father became king. Preparations for his future began immediately. He was withdrawn from his naval course before graduation and sent to Magdalen College, Oxford, to continue his education. However, he was not particularly interested in academics. Edward left the university after 8 terms without earning a degree. However, he had learned to play polo with the university club. As a young man, Edward served in the British Army during the First World War and undertook several overseas tours on behalf of his father. He immediately became popular due to his charm, charisma, and fashion sense, which quickly made him one of the most admired figures of his time.
People's princess, then Edward was the people's prince. He was adored the world over. He was good-looking, he was charismatic.
The media were always following him, often praising his charm and his sense of style. To the public, he seemed modern, different from the stiff image people often had of the royals. But after the war, something about Edward changed. He became restless, always chasing excitement, moving from one social event to another. He started keeping company with people who didn't quite fit the royal circle. This worried his parents, especially King George, who wanted him to take life more seriously. Yet Edward had made up his mind to live as he pleased. He ignored every warning that came his way. He went from one affair to another, and soon his private life began to spill into the papers. One of his earliest and most troubling relationships was with a married Parisian woman named Marguerite Alibert. Edward was said to be infatuated with her, but that affair turned dark when Marguerite later shot her husband at the Savoy Hotel. The story caused panic in the palace and almost dragged the royal family's name through dirt. However, the royal family worked quietly behind the scenes to keep Edward's name out of her murder trial. It was a scandal the royal family couldn't afford at the time, as he was the future king. Edward was also linked to Rosemary Levison Gower, whom he eventually left. His romantic affairs multiplied after that, many of them with married women. The pattern infuriated his father, King George V, who feared his son lacked the discipline or judgment to rule. The king once told his advisors that Edward would bring ruin upon himself in less than a year when he took the throne. It seemed in time that he was not far from the truth. Royal insiders also revealed that King George privately hoped that his second son, Albert, might one day succeed instead as king, as Edward showed no interest in marriage or steady conduct. Despite his recklessness, Edward was friendly and charming. He often called Albert's wife, Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, as if he already sensed that her destiny would lead her to the crown. In 1930, King George gave Edward Fort Belvedere, a secluded residence in Windsor Great Park. There, Edward surrounded himself with fashionable guests and continued his affairs with married women. It was during one of his social gatherings that he met Wallis Simpson, a woman who would change the course of his life and the monarchy. Stay with us as we unveil more on the abdicated king. Wallis was an American and married at the time to her second husband, Ernest Simpson, a British businessman. However, before that, she had been the wife of a U.S. naval officer, Win Spencer. From the moment Edward met Wallis, Edward was drawn to her. Wallis was witty and self-assured. She seemed unlike anyone in his circle. They began to spend increasing amounts of time together, and soon their affair became the subject of whispers in court and government circles. Although the British papers never wrote anything about their affair, King George V suspected Edward's relationship with Wallis, but Edward denied it, insisting that Wallis was merely a friend. However, when the king learned otherwise, he was furious and asked Edward to end the relationship, but he didn't. He even brought Wallis to the palace, but King George refused to receive her and distanced himself from his son. The rift between father and son deepened as Edward grew more defiant. Wallis was accused of having an undue influence over him, and many in high society believed she dominated his every decision. The thought of an American divorcee, one with a complex past, holding sway over the heir to the British throne, alarmed both the royal household and the government. They feared what might happen once Edward became king, and their fears soon became real. On January 20th, 1936, King George V died, and Edward ascended the throne as King Edward VIII.
King George passed the shrine that was raised to the million who died for him. He died serving their memory.
The next day after his ascension, he appeared with Wallis Simpson, watching the proclamation of his accession from a window at St. James's Palace. This was an act that defied custom. Edward also broke another long-standing tradition by ordering that his official coin portrait face the same direction as his father's, rather than the opposite direction, as he wanted to show his hair parting. These gestures, though small, symbolized his disregard for convention. Within months, Edward's behavior unsettled ministers. He involved himself in political matters that were supposed to remain beyond the crown's influence. Government officials began withholding confidential papers, fearing he might share them carelessly with Wallis or her guests. The monarchy had entered its most precarious moment in generations, but the worst was yet to come. The officials didn't trust Edward, especially not with the secrets of the government. A few months into his tenure as king, Edward made it clear that he wanted to marry Wallis Simpson. This was shocking to everyone, as they didn't expect him to marry a woman who had been divorced once and was seeking a divorce from her second husband. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the Dominion governments were strongly against the marriage. They stated clearly that a divorced woman with two living ex-husbands was politically and socially unacceptable as a prospective queen consort. The Church of England also stood firmly against Edward's decision to marry divorcee Wallis, as Edward was the titular head of the Church of England, which at the time disapproved of remarriage after divorce, if a former spouse was still alive. They asked that Edward step down from the throne if he wanted to marry Wallis Simpson. Edward, however, suggested that he would remain king, but that Simpson would not take the title of queen consort and that their children would not inherit the throne. Many people in the church and senior politicians, including Winston Churchill, agreed with this idea, but it was rejected by the British cabinet and the Dominion governments. They were not ready to change the rules or traditions of the monarchy because of Edward. Edward was unhappy with the way everything was going, and he knew that if he married against the government's wishes, he was going to cause a crisis, as the ministers were prepared to resign. After several private discussions, Edward told Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin that he was going to abdicate if they would not support his marriage to Simpson. Baldwin gave Edward three options. He was either to marry against his minister's advice and cause a constitutional crisis, give up the idea of marrying Wallis, or abdicate. Edward weighed the options and decided to go after his own desires. He chose to marry Wallis Simpson and signed the instrument of abdication, declaring that none of his descendants were ever going to ascend the throne. Notably, Edward reigned for only 326 days, and his reign remains the shortest of any British monarch to date. Edward married Simpson after her divorce was finalized, and they didn't have children, and didn't divorce until his death. However, Edward's abdication made his younger brother, Prince Albert, Duke of York, Elizabeth's father, the next in line to be king. Albert ascended the throne, taking the regnal name George VI, signifying continuity with his father, King George V. This made Princess Elizabeth the heir to the throne, since her father did not have a male child. After King George VI died, Elizabeth took the throne. When Elizabeth died in 2022, Charles became king, and, like his mother before him, it was expected that when his time came and he eventually died, William would naturally succeed him. But here was King Charles III abdicating the throne for William and Catherine. But the story doesn't end here. Keep watching as we unveil Prince William's reaction to his father's abdication. Prince William's reaction to his father's abdication. Prince William has always been prepared to take the throne. He has been taking up many responsibilities since his father became king, but he was also shocked by his father's announcement to abdicate. When asked about his plans for the monarchy, William spoke of his intention to modernize the monarchy. This was not entirely new, as William has often spoken of his desire to modernize the institution by focusing more on the smaller R of the royal family and less on the bigger R of the royal system. This meant encouraging the inclusion of younger royals to take on more responsibilities, as he believed they had a better understanding of how to connect with the public. This was a shift for the monarchy, unlike the traditional era, where most responsibilities were held by senior royals, while the younger ones were usually left in the background with nothing significant to do. Many people stated that William's idea for change was a quiet criticism of King Charles. But was this true? Let's find out. In William's own words, his agenda when he takes the throne is not rebellion, but renewal, a change that people can talk about and be proud of. He explained that he wants progress for the country, not repetition. He doesn't want to do things the way they have always been done. He wants to do something that leaves a lasting impact.
But I do think we're heading the right way, and I'm excited by that journey and that progress.
William once reflected, "I want to question things more. Are we still doing and having the most impact we could be having? If you're not careful, history can be a real weight and an anchor around you, and you can feel suffocated by it. I think it's important to live for the here and now." Unlike in the past, when the royal family was constantly caught in scandals, William has been working to shift the headlines toward a more positive and forward-looking monarchy. His plan is not rebellion, but evolution, an approach that shows the royal family can modernize without losing its dignity. There have also been reports that William does not plan to move into Buckingham Palace full-time. His goal is for the monarchy to have a real impact on the people, one that they can feel in their daily lives. However, one detail has stood out in all of William's plans for the future. There has been no mention of Queen Camilla, his stepmother. From his emphasis on younger royals, it is clear that Camilla will not play an active role in Prince William's reign. This does not come as a surprise, given Camilla's history with William and the painful role she played in the breakdown of his parents' marriage. Even though many years have passed, it is widely believed that William still carries deep feelings about it. Once William becomes king, Camilla will be moved quietly into the background. Although she will hold the title of Queen Dowager after King Charles's death, she will not have an active role in William's monarchy. Still, Camilla is known for her determination and is believed to be making quiet efforts to maintain influence within the royal circle. For instance, when both Catherine and King Charles were ill, Camilla stepped forward to show how capable she could be. She took on extra duties, worked tirelessly, and made herself visible, all in an effort to prove she could continue serving alongside William. Some say she hoped he would see her as still relevant to the monarchy's future. But royal watchers say William's plans had already been decided long before. It was also reported that when William shared his future vision of involving younger royals with his father, Camilla reportedly reacted angrily. She was said to have shouted in disapproval, objecting to any plan that reduced her role or gave her duties to the younger generation. She wanted to remain visible and relevant in the monarchy. Charles tried to persuade William to consider including more of the older royals in his plans, but William reportedly stood firm. This was surprising to some, especially since he and Camilla had presented a united front earlier in the year when he publicly praised her dedication and service. Yet many now believe that moment was for appearances. Behind the scenes, William's stance has never changed. His future vision of the monarchy does not include Camilla. the woman he still associates with the untimely death of his mother. While William and Catherine continue to carry out their roles as the nation's future king and queen, it is remarkable to think that none of this would have been possible if King Edward VIII had not abdicated the throne decades ago. That single decision reshaped the entire line of succession and paved the path for King Charles and ultimately for William himself. What do you think of King Charles's decision to abdicate? What do you think is the reason for this decision? Let us know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and check out the next video popping up on your screen now. You will like it.